Hey guys, it's Lillian from the Postmodern family, and if you haven't seen our videos before, we are Americans who live in the UK, and we have made a ton of videos about different foods in the UK and the NHS and living the traditional family life. So hit that subscribe button and you can find out more about us on patreon.com/thepostmodernfamily. I'm going to talk to you today about a response to the video I made previously called US versus UK healthcare. Now, there have been a lot of good comments, so I want to address a couple of them, and then I also want to just talk to you about the question, is the NHS free? And that's the problem where I made a bit of a slip up, I think, in my previous video where I said, oh, well, it's free to us. But I guess what I was trying to say is that we don't have to pay any extra money out of pocket. So, first of all, let me address the question, is the NHS free? Of course it's not. Somebody has to pay for it. And how it works for the individual permanent resident is that if you permanently reside in the UK, you are allowed to benefit from the NHS. And how you pay for it is through your taxation. Being taxed goes towards the government, and then the government decides how much of that goes towards the NHS. And that is how the NHS is funded. Now, of course, you can go and pay above and beyond the money that you're already paying towards the NHS and get private insurance. Someone had said about self-referring in the NHS, and I have a story for you that I couldn't figure it out, and my husband hasn't been able to figure out how to self-refer yet either. Not sure what you mean by that. My experience of NHS has mainly been having to do with pregnancy, labor, and birth. There are a few minor things about, rearing children and if they get ill, how we benefit from the NHS because of those situations. But none of our family members have serious illnesses, major injuries, and so we don't approach the NHS or health insurance with that kind of experience. That you have to take that into account when I'm talking about what my view of healthcare is. Okay, so let's go into a couple of comments. Russell Hogben commented,
I follow the healthcare debate in the US, and when I see how the two parties over there are tying themselves in knots over the issue, I'm so glad I live here. In my opinion, people's health is too important to be left to the market.
That is a very good point. When we talk about the market, we're talking about supply and demand. And if you have many different independent or private hospitals competing over the market, then therefore, hopefully, the quality of care would increase. And hopefully, the cost of healthcare would decrease. However, it's not really the case in America. It's not truly left to market in that sense, because then we have a third party called insurance that comes and takes over, and they, for some reason, they prevent the direct market from being influenced by the customer. So, for example, if I will go to a hospital and I receive great service and I, tell my friends about this great hospital, well, a lot of them aren't able to choose that hospital because of their insurance. So their insurance determines which hospitals, which doctors that they're allowed to use. And so therefore that's limiting it from being truly market driven. And I do believe that if it was truly market driven, we would have the best healthcare in America with the lowest costs. The other thing about that, Russell, is yes, I can totally see how when people are debating, the Republicans and the Democrats are debating over healthcare, what kind of healthcare they should have. It is very confusing. The common person doesn't really understand what the NHS looks like. So if they were to use the NHS as a comparison, the average American wouldn't know what that means. And I've got to say, if the Democrats are saying, yeah, we should institute something like the NHS here, I might be for that. But at the same time, the Republicans are trying to introduce a fair, an open, truly open, fair market, then I would be also interested in that. So, okay. MacLeod says,
great and fair video, but it would be interesting to know just how much health insurance costs in the US.
In the US, our health insurance came out of the check that my husband would get from his employer, and it was quite high too. I would say I'm not sure by our numbers if we actually paid more in the US versus in the UK, but it does seem like we get taxed a lot more in the UK. So I can't be sure. I don't remember our health insurance. We also paid for dental and for vision, and then like chiropractic services and all that. So the NHS doesn't cover that automatically. So we're not paying towards that in our taxes. Clarissa Gaffour says,
as far as I understand it in the UK, as here in Hong Kong, if you go private and use insurance, you have the same amount of choices as in the States.
I think I would agree with that. But of course, once again, you have to remember that people are already paying their taxes, and their taxes are already going towards the NHS. And then so to go private, that means that they would have to pay above and beyond what they're already paying towards healthcare just to go private and use that insurance, private insurance. And then they may have the same amount of choices. However, once again, I would say the highest medical equipment and people are probably in the US. A lot of people fly to the US for very serious, very major, very innovative medical events. So it's not necessarily exactly in terms of choices, but yes, I guess you can go and maybe with private insurance you can demand something. But once again, we also have private insurance here, and we have not been able to self-refer and get the things that we want without someone else signing off on it. Some other NHS doctor has to sign off and say, no, they really do need this procedure. So we haven't found that yet here in the UK. Winnie Wynn says,
why do so many US women die giving birth?
And then there's a link to that. I haven't read it yet, but I can say that so many US women die giving birth because birth is highly medicalized, and they've completely forgotten about how natural birth is supposed to be. So when you start introducing things like Pitocin, which here is called syntocinon, or they also call it oxytocin, but it truly is a synthetic oxytocin. So in America, Pitocin is supposed to speed up your contractions, speed up a labor, and that is very painful. So oftentimes that goes hand in hand with getting the epidural in America, which they don't have gas and air in America yet. I don't know why. But so they're getting pain relieved, and then it just kind of goes downhill from there. It's a cascade of interventions, if you would. So if you didn't do that first intervention, maybe you would end up having a completely natural birth and it would be fine. But because the US women have, one, few of them understand natural birth, and two, all of the doctors and nurses and midwives, they're trained in this highly medicalized birth, whereas here in the NHS you have more midwives trained in natural birth. So in the US, if you work in a hospital, then you are trained in medical birth, really. If you want to train in natural birth, you have to go with a midwife unit or find certified professional midwives that don't work inside hospitals, and it's kind of like an apprenticeship, very different. So Fight for Freedom says,
the NHS works great for Britain and British people, but falters and crashes when the rest of the world who don't pay national insurance come and use it for free. It gets overburdened and virtually grinds to a halt when the queues and demand gets greater than the money being paid in by working people to hold it up.
So remember what I said about permanent residents in the UK are allowed to take advantage of NHS? That is true, and if you're not a permanent resident, you're not supposed to be taking advantage of the NHS. Unfortunately, a lot of people come over and they call it health tourism, and they take advantage of the services and then they don't pay. They are supposed to pay. The NHS they do bill these people who aren't able to show their eligibility of using NHS services. But once again, how do they follow up on that money? How do they get that money from the patient? So they recently tried to institute where the nurses and midwives and doctors are supposed to check their eligibility before they serve them, before they treat them. And that's a great problem because a lot of people who work in the NHS truly believe that health care should be provided to anybody, no matter the circumstance. They think health is so important, why talk about money? And they are kind of refusing to use the method of checking beforehand. So I don't know, it's different mentalities. They're gonna come, basically, if we're gonna say that we're gonna treat anybody when they come to us, then of course people are gonna take advantage of that and do health tourism. So, okay, Dan L says,
Well, the NHS put my mother in the wrong department and she died age 69.
very sorry to hear that.
Yes, maybe everyone is covered, but because so many people need the service with limited resources, the service is overstretched. As a British citizen, I might consider private medical insurance for my daughter and do not want the same thing to happen to her. I have no experience with the US medical system.
So this is true. A lot of people that I talk to who have not had good experiences with the NHS have decided just to go private with most things. For example, for tongue tie for babies, it's very important to get that released in order for there to be a good breastfeeding relationship, because a lot of mothers find breastfeeding very painful if you have tongue tie, if the baby has tongue tie. Some people say that if you go with the NHS and you want to get that tongue tie cut, that you have to get on some sort of waiting list, and it takes a long time. It can take 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and that's just ridiculously long, especially if you're breastfeeding every 2 hours, 3 hours, and it's like pins and needles, really painful. So a lot of people then would choose to pay to get their tongue tie cut when they want it. To me, it just feels unfair that if you want to get treated at the timeline that you want to get treated, and you're paying it out of your taxes, but you have to wait in line, it doesn't make sense to have to pay even more. So you're obligated to pay that tax. You're obligated to pay for the NHS, but then you have to pay above and beyond that to get it in a timely manner. So a timely manner. Golgluck says,
The NHS is a glorious jewel.
it's true. People who need it and people who have used it and find it are very pleased with the NHS, and they would never get rid of it. Okay. Stephen Fletcher says,
Most Americans in the US can't afford good healthcare insurance unless your employer provides it, and most stay in jobs whether they want to or not due to that fact.
I would agree with you wholeheartedly. When you have a system like the NHS and you don't have to worry about your employer providing healthcare insurance, that you can, if the government is providing your healthcare insurance, then you can go and change jobs, depending on where the raises are, what city you want to live in, and not really think so much about, look at the benefits from this is so good. If I move, I'm not going to be able to get those kind of healthcare benefits. So it does tie people down. Jordan Peterson did a short 2-minute video about this, how in Canada it has a system very similar to here. I wonder why. He's saying that with something like NHS, with something like government healthcare, people can be entrepreneurs. People can take more risks in their jobs and trying different things because they don't have to worry about losing healthcare insurance. Does make a lot of sense. Thanks so much for your comments on the previous one. Right now, I just want to talk a little bit about the difference in mentality for an American coming to the UK and dealing with healthcare. So, before I was pregnant with my son, I was pregnant with another baby that was unfortunately miscarried. Before the miscarriage, though, I had felt like I needed to get tested for the MTHFR gene mutation. And I asked my midwife and the GP for this test. I wanted to get tested to see if I had this mutation because it affects how your body absorbs folic acid. And if you have the gene mutation, then your body doesn't absorb folic acid, and therefore you shouldn't be taking any folic acid. You should be eating or taking natural folate. The GP did not know what that was. The midwife did not know what that was. They'd never heard of this gene mutation, and neither of them would allow me to get this test. And I was really bothered by that. I also asked to be prescribed some progesterone because my previous pregnancy I was prescribed progesterone. That was in America. Well, they also said that there's no need for me to take progesterone and the NHS wouldn't cover that, nor would they prescribe it for me. And unfortunately, I did miscarry. And I can't help but think, I wonder, what if they did what I was asking for? And would I have been able to prevent this miscarriage? Who knows? But that is one of the things that when people say that you can self-refer, I'm not sure what you mean. And all of these things, like with this gene mutation, they eventually said, well, you'd have to miscarry 3 times before they'd even consider you taking this gene mutation test. Thanks so much for watching this video about the NHS. Is the NHS free? Let me know in the comments what you think, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!